Good morning. Thank you for being with us this morning. I am Dr. Pauline Harris. I'm a board member with the John Hope Franklin Center for Reconciliation. And also I work for Tulsa Public Schools as a training coordinator and onboarding coordinator. I want to thank everyone for joining us this morning. Your support tells us that you are with us and on the pathway of Good morning. Thank you for being with us this morning. I am Dr. Pauline Harris. I'm a board member with the John Hope Franklin Center for Reconciliation. And also I work for Tulsa Public Schools as a training coordinator and onboarding coordinator. I want to thank everyone for joining us this morning. Your support tells us that you are all right. We're going to try this again. So thank you for your continued support. And as you know, this is our 13th year for our symposium. And we appreciate your support over these past 13 years. And as we go on this pathway of reconciliation and advocacy. Also, few housekeeping items. As you know, this session is being recorded. So thank you for your continued support. And as you know, this is our 13th year for our symposium. And we appreciate your support over these past 13 years. And as we go on this pathway of reconciliation and advocacy. Also, few housekeeping items. As you know, this session is being recorded. So thank you for your continued support. And as you know, this is our 13th year for our symposium. And we appreciate your support over these past 13 years. And as we go on this pathway of reconciliation and advocacy. All right, so we're going to start with a few housekeeping items. The restrooms, the side of both doorways, exit there, and also your mobile phones. Please check to make sure they're turned off. Please note, we will have time for audience questions for both the in-person and online group. We will have a link for you to type your questions so that we have an electronic way to collect and quickly organize them for the presenter. For the online group, you will have that link posted in your chat area. For the in-person group, we will have those links posted on the screen as a QR code. Please use your mobile phone camera to point at the display code, and link will allow you to access the questions. We will have volunteers around the room to assist. If you have not used your phones for a QR code in the past. One final note, we will have the same process of links and QR codes at the end of each session for our surveys, us that will give you an opportunity to provide your feedback, both online and in person. Now, on with our presentation. For this morning, we thank you for attending the session and for being with us in this work of reconciliation. We especially honor the ancestors of Greenwood, the Native Americans of this area, and the state, along with the spirit of harmony that connects all of us as a community. This morning, I have the pleasure of introducing Ms. Sandra Quince. She is the Chief Executive Officer responsible for leading all elements of Paradigm for Parity, or the P4P, strategic plan, financial, programmatic, and operational performance of the organization. She works with the coalition, co-chairs, and board of directors to oversee and execute the organization's strategic vision and growth plan. Prior to this role, Sandra was the Diversity and Inclusion Executive responsible for Global Diversity and Inclusion Council, or the GDIC, with Bank of America. In this role, she supported the CEO and the Chief Diversity Officer in delivering the Global Diversity and Inclusion Strategy. Ms. Quince will be joined this morning in an interview style discussion with Therese Andre Aduni. Therese was born in Tulsa and a third-generation survivor of the 1921 Black Wall Street Massacre. Her documentary, Rebuilding Black Wall Street, made by her father in the aftermath of the 1921 race massacre, which highlights the resilience and determination of the Greenwood community. Aduni advocates for the documentary and occupying study guide to be included in public, private, and charter school curriculum in the state of Oklahoma. And also it also covers the economics and social studies. And her father, Reverend Harold Anderson, was an amateur filmmaker who sought to capture the joy he saw in his community. This documentary shows moving footage of men and women who stayed in or came to Tulsa to rebuild the area. The neighbors and the friends were captured in their day-to-day living activities, and also the running of businesses in Greenwood from 1948 to 1960. Woven into the documentary are narrations by Anderson Aduni, as well as her relatives. The film energizes with both mature and youthful voices, and for archival purposes, Rebuilding Black Wall Street may also provide some viewers with the extraordinary possibility of identifying family members. Please join me in welcoming Sandra Quince this morning with her interviewee, Teresa Anderson Aduni.
Thank you, Dr. Harris. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. I am so happy to be here this morning, and thank you for supporting us with John Hope Franklin. John Hope Franklin is a beacon in our community, and thank you so much for your support. I'm supposed to remind you about you can use your electronic device to ask questions. All right, let's get started. Good morning.
Good morning.
We had a brief discussion earlier when we met, but let me see. I got too many scripts here.
That's quite all right. While you're looking for that, I just want to say thank you for having me with you today. It is such a pleasure to be here. And I am so glad that wasn't my voice echoing up there. So you handled it with such grace and poise. But it is certainly wonderful to be here today. And why don't I just start off talking a little bit about how I became the CEO of Paradigm for Parity, because I do think that's important. If you read my bio, sometimes people go, wait a minute, does she work for Bank of America or is she a CEO? And so it is both. And that's the beautiful thing about the career journey that I've had. So I am fully on the CEO of Paradigm for Parity, which is a coalition organization that partners with companies and organizations around the world to achieve gender parity with a lens on racial equity. But I do that by way and support of Bank of America's Leader on Loan program. And so Bank of America has what we call a Leader on Loan program, which takes some of their executive talent and allows them to go off and to partner with or work with organizations to really help further develop either diversity, equity, and inclusion or other programs to benefit the greater good of our society. So it's a way for the organization to take really strong talent and leverage that talent in the community. And so in a way, but it's also a way for me as an employee of Bank of America to leverage what I love to do and to take that skill set that I have, but also for me to learn and to gain experience, exposure, and education as well. So I am really excited about, I've been in this role now for a year. June 1st will be a year for me, and I will be also re-upping another year with Paradigm for Parity, and have learned some amazing lessons through becoming a CEO. And also have really, I'm very proud of the work that the organization has been able to do. We have over 144 coalition members. We have companies such as your Walmarts, your Bank of Americas, your Accentures, but we also have smaller firms and organizations as well that we help, and we touch over 6.5 million employees around the world. But the most important piece is really the partnership around helping these companies to think strategically around their business strategy. Notice I didn't say diversity strategy, I said business strategy, because you have to incorporate diversity into your business strategy. It should not be separate and apart. It should be integrated and fully integrated into every aspect of the way you lead and run your business. And so I know that we're going to get into more detail around that in just a little bit.
Thank you. And you might have addressed this, but the first question is how can you share how you define DEI, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion.
That's right. So this is really an interesting conversation. And I know many of you probably sitting in here have heard all sorts of definitions around diversity and inclusion. So let me start there. Equity has become sort of a newer term that we use in corporate America. And so there's been this great debate around whether you use the term equity or equality. So you've even heard that. Sometimes people use them interchangeably, but they are very different. So let me start with diversity. Diversity is that faction of all of us that makes us different. And when you're in a corporate environment and you talk about diversity, it is the piece that we talk about around gender, race and ethnicity, religious diversity, differently abled, LGBTQ+. So it's those factions that make us different, make us unique. It's the thing that you want to show up and bring with you every day, that authentic part of you. And it's the piece, quite frankly, that is easy to measure in an organization. Because it's easy to understand where people are from a gender perspective. Who do you have working from you for a gender perspective? Where does that talent sit in the organization? Is that talent in your leadership, or is that talent sitting in your entry level, right? What's the progression like? And so those are the things that we measure around diversity. So that's really when we talk about diversity in the corporate setting, that's really what we're talking about. And again, you've heard it explained all kinds of ways, whether it's about the dance and being invited to the dance and all of that. But diversity is really those factions that really make us different and unique. And it's the part of us that many times we all can see. And sometimes it's hidden. Sometimes you can't see the diversity. You don't know my religion by looking at me. Sometimes you might, depending on how I'm dressed, right? So that's diversity. So let's talk a little bit about inclusion. Inclusion is not as easy to measure, but it is just as important to measure in an organization. And so this is the piece that says, what is the environment that I am creating to ensure that everyone who walks through my doors every day in my company can show up and bring their best and whole self to the organization and thrive? That's the inclusive environment that we're looking for. A couple of key words in that is everyone. Thrive. Those are two key words in the inclusive definition that are critically important. Let me tell you what diversity and inclusion is not. It is not one word. It is two, and I've given you two separate definitions, both of which are critically important to measure. It is also not a replacement strategy. So what do I mean by that? It is not a strategy to say we want to replace all white men with all women and people of color. And if you're in an organization that promotes or hires people because of the way they look, they are not doing diversity and inclusion. I'm not sure what you call that, but it is not D&I, because that's not what D&I is all about. It is about simply leveling the playing field, removing the systemic barriers in an organization to ensure that everyone has the same opportunity. So I'll give you an example. In a company, traditionally, or an organization, there's one leader of that organization, perhaps the CEO. Now, I understand there is also the direct reports, there's the board, but for the most part, can everyone agree with me that most organizations have one CEO? And when you walk into that organization or hired into that organization, you know that. Everybody knows that because they see the org chart. The difference between an organization that has cultivated, leveraged, incorporated diversity, equity, and inclusion into their business strategy is when I walk in the door and I see the org chart and I know there's one CEO. Do I feel as though I have a shot to becoming a senior leader or perhaps the CEO? That's when you know that your organization has achieved diversity, equity, and inclusion, regardless of whether or not I ever become. Do I have a shot? But if I come into that organization and I feel as though there is no place for me here, then I know that my organization has a culture challenge. So I'm going to come back to that in just a moment. I want to define for you equity, because I do think it's important for us to talk about it. And certainly during the Q&A, so please feel free. I know there's a way for you to ask your questions via the chat. There was a link, and if you're in the room, you can use your devices. We are certainly in a different day than raising our hands and having a mic run around the room. But equity and equality are two different things that are critically important for us to talk about. So when I think about equality, I think about everyone being treated equally, right? That's equality. It's really the statement around fairness and how we're addressing that. And so when I walk into a space or I show up in a space, I want to be sure that I am treated fairly, and that I'm treated similarly and not different than my peers or those around me. Equity is different. Equity is the action you have to take in order to achieve equality. See, equity is the action around removing the systemic barriers in order to ensure that I can achieve equality. And so many of you may have seen the drawing. It's a famous drawing of three individuals, whether it's a baseball field and they're standing on the rocks. Everybody remember that drawing? It's become extremely famous. I can't even remember the artist's name. But what they do is they have three people. They're all of different heights. And so equality is giving the shortest person the more boxes so that they can see over the fence, right? Equity is removing the fence. So you don't have to give me anything. You just remove that fence. And it doesn't matter how tall I am. Do you understand? Does this make sense?
Perfectly.
So it's important in organizations to be able to define this, because if you're going to build a strategy around it, you first have to define what it means for your organization and how you're going to be able to achieve that. And then besides defining it, you have to be able to put measurable goals in place. Ways to measure your success. There's no way that you work for a company. Every organization has a widget. Whether I'm selling a product, I'm selling a service, I'm providing information, everybody's providing something or selling some sort of widget, and nobody does that. I don't care if you're an educator, I don't care if you work for the city, I don't care if you work for a company or corporation, a nonprofit. Everybody has goals, and they provide measurable, tangible data and analytics to ensure we're achieving those goals. Why would you do that and not set goals for diversity, equity, and inclusion in your organization? There are 4 reasons why people get into D&I. The 4 main reasons, besides it's the right thing to do. So let's just say this, it's the right thing to do. And remember, I've already told you it's not a replacement strategy. This is for everyone. This is not about replacing white men. This is not about lifting someone over someone else. This is about removing those barriers so that everybody has the same opportunity. And there are various ways that we can go about doing that. But you're setting those goals, and you want to look at 3 primary areas. Number 1, hiring. You have to have a goal around hiring. Who are you bringing into the organization? Number 2, who are you developing and promoting? That's a lever you have to pull, because whoever I develop and give those wonderful opportunities to, they get the skills of exposure, experience, and education, and then they're the ones that's promoted. And then number 3, how am I retaining my talent? Also very critically important. Those are the 3 most important levers that you pull and that you really need to have processes around, and you also need to set goals or targets.
Thank you. I love the fence analogy. I always look at that cartoon and it's like, remove the fence. Okay, great. The second was reconciliation in the workplace. How do we help foster a broader understanding?
Yeah. And so this is interesting because I do think you have to start and go back to inclusion, right? So in the workplace, we don't really use the term reconciliation, but we don't use the term, but we do act it out, so to speak, right? So it is important that we understand the varying views of others and can respect everyone's views. Because what it is, it's really around broadening your perspective. It's not about changing who you are. Quite frankly, I don't want to change who you are. I'm not here to tell you the way you were raised, what you were taught, what your parents may have told you, what you experiences you may have had. I'm not here to judge you and tell you that was right or wrong. What I am here to do is to broaden your experience and your perspective so that you see things from a different point of view. That is so critical for all of us to see things from a different point of view. I don't necessarily have to agree with it, but I do need to be exposed so that I can better understand. And so in corporate America, when we talk about those things, which is really that term around reconciliation, we talk about inclusion. So I've talked to you about how important that is and how we need to ensure that we're providing the right environment for employees to show up, be who you are, bring your best and whole self. And let me stop there. My CEO, Brian Moynihan, once said in a meeting, he said, listen, I want you to show up and be who you are, and I want you to bring your best self, not your best ugly self. And so what did he mean by that? When you show up to this environment, I want you to show up under the auspices of our vision and our values for our company. And when I say bring your best self, I'm not saying I have a certain point of view around certain types of people. And so I feel like it's okay for me to bring that point of view to the workplace and act that out. That's not what we're saying. We're saying be who you are, be authentic, but bring your best self to this environment. And that's the thing that companies and corporations have to be able to incorporate. And if you're going to have reconciliation and inclusivity, you have to start with the people who are leading the people. What are you doing in your organizations to measure your manager population? Who is leading your people and how are they leading? Because that's important. Every day I show up to an environment, to be honest with you, the most important thing is that 50 square feet. Everybody has that 50 square feet, no matter where you work and what you do. We all have it. It's the people that are directly around you that you communicate with on a regular basis, wherever it is you show up every day for work, even if it's virtual. It's my manager, it's my peers, it's sometimes my manager's manager. So it's that 50 square feet. And when I leave a company, nobody stands up and says, you know what, I'm leaving because that CEO. No, they say I'm leaving because my manager. I'm leaving because this environment is toxic. And when they're talking about the environment, they're talking about that 50 square feet. And so we have to start with our leaders and we have to start to build an inclusive leader. There are 4 primary attributes. Now, there are many things that we need leaders to show up and be. And what I am not saying is I do understand how hard it is to lead people because you're a player and you're a coach. Not only are you on the field selling the widgets, running the plays, but you're also off the field coaching everybody else who in the game running the plays. So I understand how hard that can be. But as a leader in an organization, I also need to be mindful, besides the business strategy, I need to be mindful of how I'm treating my people, and I need to be an inclusive leader. Those attributes are, I need to be transparent. And so what do I mean by transparent? I need to show up as my authentic self. I need to share information that I know when I know it. Even if I can't tell you everything, I need to be able to say, listen, guys, there are changes happening. I know you feel it. I can't share everything right now, but I want to check in and make sure you're okay. And when I have more information that I'm able to share, I will do that. You have to be trustworthy. Can people who work for you trust you? I once worked for a leader I could not trust. I worked for a leader that wasn't transparent. And what she did to me, and I'll use those terms, is she diminished my confidence. She made me lose sight of who I was as an individual coming into that place every day. She made me want to leave the workplace that I was in. Remember, this is my 50 square feet. And because of that, I wasn't showing up as my authentic self, and I wasn't bringing my best self, and I wasn't doing my best work. So my performance began to decline. And I allowed it. So the onus was on her as the leader. So I know how important it is to work for a great leader. But the onus was also on me to recognize what was happening, and I was spiraling. And so the next time you look at somebody and you wonder, why are they spiraling? Could it be the environment that they're in? It is hard to show up every day and have microaggressions, feel like you are less than because you're told and treated that way, and then expect to perform. And listen, if that's not your testimony, that's okay. I don't expect you to understand. But God dang it, don't discount my testimony. Okay? Respect that. That's why perspective is so important. The third attribute of a leader is they have to be able to invest in their people. Invest in your people. What are you doing? When you have conversations, is it just about the number of widgets that you sold today? Or is it also about how are you doing? What's your career goals and aspirations? What are some of the barriers you're facing? How can I help support you along this journey? What experience, exposure, and education can we help provide so we can get you to the next level? So that's investing in my people. But again, that's the manager. On the onus of the employee, it's important that I own my career. Remember earlier I said in my toxic relationship I had with the manager that one time, I had to take some ownership. But I have to manage my career. The fourth attribute of an inclusive leader is that create opportunities for courageous conversations. Conversations like this are so critical. And so for many people, they don't want to do it because I don't know what to say. And in today's cancel culture, where I might be fired, I don't want to say the wrong thing, it's hard. But I implore you to be brave and not perfect. I also say it doesn't have to be that difficult. A conversation can simply start with, listen, team, I want to sit down. I want to have an authentic conversation with you today. A lot has been happening around us. I'm not going to pretend I understand it all, and I'm not even going to pretend that I know it all. But I do want to open it up for us to have a conversation where we can value each other, our voices are heard, and we can broaden each other's perspective. If I say something that doesn't sit well with you or may be offensive, I apologize and I want you to call me out on it because I'm here to learn and to grow. But I also ask that you save space for grace. You had that conversation, people will run through a brick wall for you as a leader. So that's how we cultivate inclusivity. And that's how you start with reconciliation in the workplace, because you have to be able to save space for people to have those conversations and create that type of environment.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'm always curious, earlier you were saying about identifying all areas of your company for potential talent. How do you choose, say, from the clerical pool, who would make a really good general manager, to a general manager that would make a really good regional manager? What are you looking for in those areas?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I also want to encourage the audience to get ready for your questions. I'm going to answer this, and I think we're going to be ready to take some questions.
This was the last one. I do have one more about young entrepreneurs, so maybe you can, because what you just said leads into the attributes of young entrepreneurs and, you know, people that want to start up businesses. So how does that tie into
that? So when you're identifying talent in your organization, remember I talked to you about hiring, developing, and promoting. So developing and promoting is one of those pillars that you have to pull to ensure that you're really looking at your talent holistically. Most organizations have talent and performance management that they're doing. And so the conversation really starts with the leader, right? It starts with that direct manager. Remember earlier I said, when you sit down and you have those conversations, that it's really, what are your career goals and aspirations? What is it that you're looking to do next? How can I better support you? But it's also on the onus of the employee to be prepared and ready to manage their career. And when I first started out, if I knew then what I know now, I may be on my third CEO job, to be honest. Because what I thought was, if I show up every day and just work really hard, put my head down and just work and nail the core, which is always my first rule, nail the core, do the job that they pay you to do and do it well. I thought if I just did that, I'd be promoted. And when I finally looked up from working so hard after several years and saw Bob, Sally, Tina, people just passing me by, and I'm like, what is this? I'm just as good. But I wasn't telling my story. I wasn't sharing with my manager all the great work I was doing, because I was raised that you don't brag and that your work speaks for itself. It does, but you better speak up and start talking. Somebody said the other day, a closed mouth don't eat. And so you better open your mouth and you better be ready to not brag, but share how you're adding value to that organization. And when I sit in front of my manager to tell my manager, I just want to make more money, okay, what else you got? Like that is not a conversation as an employee. And for you to sit there and just think, hey, if I just plop myself down in front of that organization, I'm just gonna get promoted. That's not how it works. It works by you building your brand, making sure you're networking, and ensuring that you're putting yourself in the position so that when they make those talent decisions, your name is the person they're calling at the table. You also have to understand sponsorship. Sponsorship is critical. And in organizations, the way up and through and to the C-suite and onto boards is sponsorship. Sponsorship is how Tim, Bob, Larry, James, Joe, John all became CEOs. And what I'm not saying is they didn't do a good job. They did. They are phenomenal at what they do. But sponsorship comes very naturally for some, And for others, it has to be intentional. So ask for a sponsor, understand the difference, get a mentor, have a board of directors of people that are speaking to you and help putting you in the position. But also when you sit in front of your manager, ask them, what's my brand? What else do I need to do? What does Exceeds look like? Because when we look at organizations at talent, we're looking for talent that has not only the person that does the best work, but the person who we know brings the most value, but also the person that is flexible in their trajectory. See, if I'm stuck in the way we used to do things all the time, and I'm that person constantly talking about the way we used to do things, and not the person looking at where the puck is going. If you watch hockey, the best hockey players know where the puck is going, and they're there when the puck gets there. That needs to be you. Because those are the people that get promoted in companies and organizations. And that's how we notice who at every level in organizations are ready for promotion. And so not only is the onus on the manager to recognize and invest in their talent, but the onus is really 100% on you as the employee to manage your career.
Just
And the entrepreneurs.
yes, I wanted to tie that in because that is really an ongoing, especially in our community. There's a lot of startups happening.
Absolutely.
And a lot of people are trying to start their own business.
Yeah, so I'm not an expert around entrepreneurs for sure, but what I can tell you is, number one, you have to have a vision. You also need a product that people are willing to buy and pay for, and you need capital. In order to get capital, you need good credit. You need a bank or an institution or an investor who's willing to invest in your products. But what I did do is there are several organizations out there that can help you with this. So of course we know about TEDC, which is led by Rose Washington. If you don't know, Google it, Creative Capital. They have all kinds of resources to help you. There's also the Institute for Entrepreneur Leadership. If you already have a business you've started, but you're interested in getting connected with capital funds, that's IFEL, and that's led by Jill Johnson. She is not even local. She is out of Charlotte. There is Black Women Business Owners of America. If you are a Black woman and you own a business or want to start a business, that is a wonderful organization to be a part of. And then don't forget about economic development that Arthur Jackson leads currently through the Tulsa Chamber. That's the role that he was brought here to do, is to help us develop businesses, especially entrepreneurs within Tulsa. So I would say to really think about connecting and getting connected to those resources so that you can create that business and the right business model to be successful.
Thank you so much for sharing today your ideas and experiences. We're going to start putting them to work. I know I am. And our next segment.
I think we have questions, but
are we ready for the Q&A online?
I have a couple of questions.
Okay, so you're the online. Okay, great. So we're going to move on to the Q&A online. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. And thank you so much to the John Hope Franklin Center for putting this together. I'm Kristen Marangoni. I coordinate service learning at Tulsa Community College, and the John Hope Franklin Center has just become such a great partner to us, both in providing a place for students to volunteer, but just in the way that they have invested in the lives of students and making projects meaningful to them. And so thank you for putting this together and for bringing such high quality speakers to talk to us about this work. I've heard a lot of presentations on DE&I, and I mean, this was probably the clearest one that I've ever heard. It was very amazing. So thank you for being so cogent about this. I wanted to remind you, in your packets, you have a QR code. If you take your phones and scan this, even with your photo app, a link will pop up, click that, and you can enter your questions into that form. If you still have some questions for these speakers, you can also take out one of the index cards from your packet if you're more comfortable handwriting questions. We have some facilitators who will be walking the aisles to pick those up. So there is still time for you to submit a question to our speakers here. And then they are getting those questions to me up here. So I do have our first question here. Did you have a question? If you need a 3x5 card, one of our facilitators will be able. One of our facilitators will bring that to you here in just a second. So our first question here is, what suggestions do you have for frontline leaders when their executive leadership is not fully behind advocacy or advocacy for the organization with practical resources such as people or funding?
Yeah, that's always a great question because I get that question all the time. What if my leadership is not on board? And how do we start that movement? So that's the key, start. So you got to start asking questions, right? And so what I would do is I would go to my manager and I would start saying, hey, I'd love to know what our organization is doing around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'd love to be able to get involved and start to help our organization in those areas. And so that's really the catalyst to start those conversations. And is there anyone else that I can speak with? I think for organizations, what employees have to realize today is that we are in an employee-driven model. See, we used to be in an employer-driven model, but now we're in an employee-driven model, meaning that employees need to speak up, speak out, and they also can organize themselves so that they can come as a collective group to say, here's what we're looking for, the type of environment we want to work in, but then offer your time and talent to help the organization get there. Here are some suggestions. And you can partner with organizations such as Paradigm for Parity. So you can go to parity.com. And that's an org, which is, I'm the CEO of that organization, but organizations like Paradigm for Parity helps companies and corporations really think about their strategy. But there are all kinds of organizations that are available to help your company really get on the right path to building their strategy. And so I think it starts with the employees, not only asking the question, but raising your hand to be a part of the solution.
Love that. I love that. Yes, thank you. And our second question here is, you mentioned that companies have a major challenge they must meet: hire diverse teams. How do you suggest dealing with this when positions remain unfilled because the diverse pool is not applying for a variety of reasons, maybe pay, education, job level, or work at home options unavailable?
Yeah, so I think it starts with just that, right? Companies have to really, remember I went back and said we're in an employee-driven model. Companies, if you want to attract the best and brightest talent, you have to start to look at what you're offering. And you may have to shift your business model just a bit. So here's what employees are looking for today. They want flexible work hours. They want really good benefits to support them personally and professionally. They want to work in environments where they can, where the stress, where the stress factor, the anxiety factor is diminished. So they want to work in inclusive environments where they can show up and bring their best selves. And it is on the onus of companies to really think about the positions and the roles that you're offering to ensure that you're attracting that talent. Here's the other thing. Where are you sourcing? See, a lot of times we say, well, diverse people aren't applying. Well, where are you sourcing? Are you going to historically Black colleges and universities? Even if you go to predominantly white institutions, are you asking to speak with their Hispanic-led organizations, their Asian-led organizations, their Black-led organizations? Because if you're not being intentional about the way you try to attract talent, then you're forever going to be in this cycle of diverse talent is not applying. How are your roles written? Because depending on how the role is written will determine whether or not I want to apply. And then companies also need to look at how they're presenting themselves on their platforms. So when I Google your company, what does your leadership look like? Because that's the first thing that people are that they're looking at. What is your stance on diversity, equity, and inclusion? Because I'm going to look to see if this is an environment that I want to be a part of and work in. So I think it's twofold. Where are you sourcing? How are you writing those roles to attract the best and brightest talent? And then what's the reputation of your company and what are you doing to ensure that you are building or at least moving in the direction of having a diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy as a part of your business strategy?
It really takes the onus on and puts it on yourself instead of, well, they're just not applying. What can I do to get them to apply? That is so well said.
Absolutely.
So you talked about diversity being easy to measure. Have you found any assessment tools or what assessment tools exist out there to help measure the more challenging parts of inclusion and equity?
Yeah, there are all kinds of audits that are available for companies. They're escaping me, but Bloomberg has a measuring tool out there. Catalyst has a measuring tool out there. So they do exist. We even have a survey for our coalition members to help them think about their gender parity with racial lens on racial equity. So the tools are out there, but I would quite simply say it needs to start internally. So I do think everyone does need to do a culture audit. So I do think audits are great, but you can simply start by measuring internally. Who do we have working for us? Where do they sit in the organization? How deep are they from the CEO? So at what level? And then what positions do they hold? Who are my managers? So you can start just by simply taking a look internally at your organization, because that's how you build strategy. It's hard for me to understand what I need to focus on if I don't know where to focus. And so you need to really take a step back and start to think internally, pulling that data. And then that data tells the story around your organization and where you need to start. Where do you have cliffs, gaps, and where do you have successes?
Thank you. And the next question is, in your opinion, what is the most significant barrier in corporate America today faced by people from marginalized groups?
So one of the biggest barriers that I'll talk about, because there are a few, right? And you heard me earlier talk about microaggressions, and we can have a whole segment on microaggressions and what that is, and the comments and statements that people make. Sometimes it's in innocence and sometimes it's not, right? But those microaggressions really do limit psychological safety in organizations. So I'll say that. One of the barriers that we have right now is really around unconscious bias. It is the basis of how we make decisions. It's the basis of how we see the world. It's the basis of how we think about people. And the challenge with unconscious bias is it is not curable. And so what will happen is organizations we're going to have unconscious bias training. So they throw it out there for everybody to take it. That was 5 years ago. The day I walk out of unconscious bias, 15 minutes later, I'm back in my bias. Because unconscious bias is like a muscle that has to be worked. I missed my workout all last week. So I went back this week. I am so sore, I can barely walk. right back to their old habits. Well, that's unconscious bias. We go back to our old habits. And so what we have to do is to be able to mitigate bias in the moments that matter. When I go to look at a resume, I need to disarm bias. Now, I do believe that there are opportunities for blind resumes to help me disarm my bias, remove the name, remove some the things that don't even matter about a resume, where you live, what sports you played, even what college you went to. If I know you went to college, that's great. If that's all I need to know, that's all I need to know. Because that immediately evokes bias. And so I have to be able to disarm unconscious bias when I'm hiring, when I'm deciding who I'm going to give developmental opportunities to. I always give them to Sally because I can trust Sally. I know she's going to do a good job. She's my go-to person, and it's easy. See, I got to disarm myself. Why do I always give it to Sally? Why don't I think about Eduardo for that? So I got to mitigate bias in those moments. I got to mitigate bias when I'm thinking about people's salary. I got to mitigate bias when I'm promoting people, mitigate bias when I'm retaining my talent. So you get me. In all those moments that matter in the employee life cycle, we need to start to infuse bias busters so that we can mitigate that bias, and it helps make better decisions.
Thank you so much. It's not just a certification that you get once every 3 years and box check. It's got to be integrated everywhere.
No, because by the time you walk to your car, you turn on your radio and you hear something, bias.
Well, I think that's about all we have time for today, but I just wanted to thank the both of you for this very, very compelling conversation. I think a round of applause is in order here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And we will be moving along here to our next session. But let me just check in with Dwayne here. Okay. All right. Okay. So